All right. Well, welcome to part 2 of how to access funding and write successful grant applications. So we heard a very brief synopsis of all the funding available. That's not even all the funding available in Canada. I know there's some more that we had kind of thrown out there and not talked in depth about. But it just gives you a scope of what's out there. So with all of this funding out there, a big question that I get asked all the time is, how do I get it? Like, how do I get approved? And it's pretty tricky. And it's definitely hard to know what you need to include in an application if you've never done it before. So that's exactly what we're going to be talking about here. So any questions you have about, how, people are selected, whether it's a jury or whether it's one person who decides, any of those questions, that's what you can ask here. And we're going to let you know what the people reading your grants are actually looking for. So why don't we start with, any of you can jump in at any point. And actually, Riley's new up here, so maybe we'll just introduce who Riley is and why he's up here. Actually, maybe we'll all go down the line and just say why you're experiencing grants.
How we know Riley?
Yeah, and how we know Riley, and our favorite thing about Riley. Just talk briefly about your experience with grants, whether you've written them for yourself, for other people, or if you've ever, we can't say which juries we've been on, but if you've ever been on that side, like a volunteer jury for anything, because there's juries for performance opportunities too, and it's often looking for the same thing. So, Stephen, you're the most popular. We'll start with you.
Dang. I won't be after this. That's before a recording deadline. I'm very popular. Before applications are received, I'm very popular. After they're received and declined, my friends list goes down really fast, especially when we have no money. So, I'm the music program manager at Manitoba Film and Music, for those who walked in, maybe didn't miss the intro. But I started as a musician. That's how I worked my way up to this job. And alongside my colleague Bonnie, who's coming in, we manage the grant programs for Manitoba musicians applying for recording, touring, video, marketing. But back in the day, I did apply for grants many times. I worked as an artist manager, and I managed my own band. And we applied for everything. And I know Riley because he applies for many grants. But no, my favorite thing about him is he's very kind-hearted. That's true. But I was declined on my first grant. So I think the first thing to know about grants is they're not, your ambition as an artist gives you self-belief, which is extraordinary, and drives you out into the world to create your work and distribute it. And that's the compelling act of being an artist. And their expectation for receiving funding, I think, you go first to enter it with that same gusto. And I often say, generally, you expect to get declined on the first grant because it's pretty hard to get all the ducks in a row that you need, from the marketing plan, tour itineraries, or budgeting correctly to support letters. So you asked multiple questions. I know I've caught a couple of them, but I will say I was declined on my first grant for a demo, and they emailed me the feedback, and I still remember it to this day. They said no hooks. So I went on to have very successful career as a musician, so take that, jury.
I'm Tessa Gooden. I am an artist and producer. I have a project with my partner in the back, Peter, that's under my name, Tessa. But I also work at the SOCAN Foundation running the new Creative Entrepreneurial Incubator Program. I talked a little bit about that earlier. As far as what we do at SOCAN, it's a private funder, so there is a committee for every grant that does go over. We're a little bit different because a lot of the people who apply for our grants are completely eligible. It's really, you just have to be going somewhere and have an invitation to go. So it's more just going down the list and seeing how much money is available, and taking out the very few of them that aren't going to get money, because you're more likely to get approved than not. So it's a little bit different. On the Canada Arts Council side, it's more of a jury. There's a different jury with every grant, and every decision being made basically is going to be a different jury. Even the same grant, every deadline will have a different jury, just to kind of make sure that it's not the same thing going through all the time. So that's a little bit about what I do. And I have gotten I write grants for myself. I have written for other artists successfully for Factor. I've obviously gotten SOCAN Foundation grants as well prior to working there. And Canada Council is one I struggle with a little bit. I've gotten a lot of, what do they call it? When it's not unsuccessful, but it's not successful. Recommended. I've gotten a lot of recommended, which at first I was like, what does this mean? It doesn't say unsuccessful. And then they say, actually, this has a lot of merit and we think you deserve money. We just don't have any to give you at the moment. So I've gotten to that point with Canada Council a couple of times. So it's interesting. And I definitely did get declined on my first grant as well. So yeah, you definitely persevere, and the fact that you're here is a huge thing. You definitely are gaining some more tools than anybody who isn't. So.
Yeah, I'm Riley, and I am a musician and producer, engineer. Oh, I'm a musician and also.
But not a lead singer, obviously. No. Sorry, I'm just teasing you about the microphone.
Yeah, I'm here because I write a lot of grants for my own band and also just for people that I work with. I'm mostly familiar with MFM grants because that's what we have here. I have done a few Factor grants, but I think the process is, a lot of the key parts of the process are really important, and I've just seen a lot of grants, so hopefully I can be helpful to people. I don't know what else to say.
Okay, well, my name is Elise. I work here at Manitoba Music, and it's my job to know about as many funders as I can. And I've been in bands for a really long time, and both bands have been successful at some grants and unsuccessful at others. I've been turned down from like more than one grant application. I've seen a lot more no's than I have yeses, but it's never stopped me, and I keep applying and just always asking questions. I've even given some examples of our grants which you'll see later that I've done with my band, and given Stephen, or actually Bonnie, permission to rip them apart. They were approved, but there's probably things in there I didn't need and things that I did, and so I usually am just like information all the time. But I've also been on the receiving end. I've been on many different juries for different things, but I have seen examples of like really great applications for like not just grants, but showcases and that kind of thing. So that being said, I've seen a lot. I've applied successfully for other artists with their grant applications as well for years, and technically I'm like the Factor affiliate here because that's what Manitoba Music does. So I know mostly about Factor. If you ask me some in-depth questions, I should be able to answer those. So that's me, and we'll just kind of get into the thick of things and talk about just the basics. And I think, well, okay, how many of you are interested like in applying for a recording grant? Okay. How many are interested in applying for a video grant in the near future? Okay. What about for a tour in the near future? Okay, so most people are here for recording, so we're going to start with that one, and that one does have the bulk. It's the most bulky of all of them. So let's talk about if you're looking, to get a recording grant. What does anything, like whether it's Factor or whether it's MFM, they're asking for a marketing plan. Can you explain what that means? What is a marketing plan?
I mean, I can start a little bit with what it's not, maybe. Is some people, when they talk, some people who aren't familiar with grant writing, when they talk to me or ask me for help or advice, they're like, how do I trick these people into thinking I'm deserving of this money? And the key thing with a marketing plan is like, the best way to have a good marketing plan is to actually have a good marketing plan. So you should be thinking about, if you're thinking of applying for a commercial, like an MFM or Factor, those are commercial grants. Like they want to see that you're getting a return. So think about your music as a career. That's the way to start with a marketing plan. And what are you going to do to achieve your goals as a career? So that's the first step, that people maybe who've never written a grant before are like, I don't know how to trick these people. That's kind of maybe try and shift your mindset into being like, what can I do to think of my music or art as a career?
I guess I can chime in with saying, if you think of your music, because when we get to the marketing plan part of it, it's how are we going to grow as a business? So think of it as, how am I going to make like 5 cents, 10 cents? So you've got your music. What am I going to do to make it more accessible so that people can get it? How am I going to build on the original product of my music to create more revenue, whether it be merch, different other ways that you can reach other people, basically? Like, marketing is about putting things out. Like, you have something, how are we going to, kind of just multiply the impact of the original product, which is the music, and help it grow in all the ways it can possible, or help it reach all the ways it can possible. So that could be like, include, what publicist am I going to use, and what connections do they have for me? What manager do I have, and where are his or her connections? What relationships do I have with radio? Where do I plan on touring this? And why did you plan on touring it there? Have you looked into the analytics on your Spotify account, and you see, my listenership is actually outside of my home city. I have to leave. Like, why do you have to do this now? And why should we give you money to go somewhere else? Prove to us that, you can even have a reach in that place, right? So it's about kind of digging deeper into the psychology of your listeners, of where you think you can make the most impact, and then proving those things. Like, show in your marketing plan, like, this is the outline of the cities where people are listening. This is why I think I need to be there. This is why I want to make this specific t-shirt only maybe for these couple dates, because there's a more northern feel to this, to that community. Or, maybe people in Toronto like more, I don't know, like niche-y things. Like, this is specifically for my market there, and this is why I want to make 3 different t-shirts. Or it's why you're making the decisions you're making, and why you think those decisions will bring in more revenue, is how I kind of see it. I don't know, maybe Stephen can help.
Those are all correct. I agree. For the recording program, the first, one of the key items in the background, of course, is the music, right? So always making sure that you're represented really well in the recording that you're delivering, that the quality of the song is the best one of your collection that you have to deliver to the juries, because you're scrutinized against a panel of, and for Factor nationally, Canada Council, they use national juries, and us, you're scrutinized against, by your peers. So you want to have a high quality music to deliver with really high quality song, and an okay quality recording. But the marketing plans are such a funny thing. Like, I can't believe how much musicians have to know about these kind of weird documents that only exist in the minds of grant administrators. Like, you have to show the grant administrators this thing that you don't know what it looks like, because they don't show you an example. So today we're going to show you examples. So, but it's a 4 or 5 page document, to tell you what it is, depending on the kind of scope of initiatives. Usually it's 4 to 5 of the actual plan itself, with a bunch of other documents that you can, supporting documents that you'll put in there too, depending on the level of detail. But for us, it's around 4 to 5 pages generally that you get for most of the applications, specifically for recording. That's generally what we say you should aim for. And it's bullet points, or it can be bullet points with paragraphs fleshing out what you're going to do to support the marketing of your song that you want to get recording funding for, or album, how you're going to do those things, and when you're going to do them. So those are the 3 things. If you're not answering those 3 questions to yourself when you're writing these things out, you're not going to be able to convince the jury that they'll understand exactly what you're doing. And if there's any confusion in juries, they really sniff it out, because they're seeing so many applications. So like trickery, mirrors, smoke, all that stuff doesn't really work. Facts work. If there's any untruths that are presented in the marketing plan, those really rise to the top, and juries fixate on them. Like, I don't participate in these juries. I have participated in juries in the past prior to getting my job. Bonnie and I are only observers, so we just watch the psychology of the jury play out in front of us like witnesses, and they definitely sniff out untruths. So answering those big simple questions, I think, are the first steps, and then you step back to a little bit from that and go, okay, well, what are the traditional things that most artists around me are doing? Or what are my instincts as an artist to do? What are like the things I'm doing right now to engage my fan base? And you actually just write that down, and all those answering those same questions, what you're going to do, how you're going to do it, and why you're doing it.
Awesome, thanks. Okay, so let's maybe talk about like what are the ways that you can market an album then? Like, what are people looking for in that? Are there, like, for example, touring is obviously it's a way that you can market your album. So having tour plans is important. But what are some other things that the jury or other people would be looking for?
So yeah, touring is a big one. Along with touring comes a lot of other opportunities. I've seen a new trend lately with merch where people release their merch before they go on tour. That also can create a little bit of revenue before you go, but also kind of puts your brand out there alongside of your music and gets people excited about actually seeing you because they already have their hands on something. There's also working with people like publicists or people who have connections to radio tracking. That's a big way to market an album. If you have a connection to someone who can actually, pitch to radio across the country or pitch to satellite radio, you can increase, obviously, your reach in that way. I'm trying to think of other things.
Sure. Well, for setting up kind of marketing, you want to for a marketing plan. I think it's good to be broad in scope and not to fixate too much on maybe one item alone, because it's got to look a bit balanced. That you've really kind of thought about how you're going to reach your audience in through as many channels as possible. So. When in marketing applications, it's important if you're a touring artist, from a genre that does play live concerts quite frequently, to have a touring aspect. So I kind of usually say to people, let's take it out in categories and then just fill in the blanks for what you're going to do in those categories. So what you're going to do, and these are things you're doing probably already as artists. So one is, and some things maybe you're not doing as artists, which are holes to be filled. So one would be, so categories of the traditional marketing for music would be through your own channels, so your website, social media, so the things you have ownership over, and your email list, which are still really valuable. And if you're not gathering those, please do, because social media will be changing in the next 5 years again, and there'll be other formats. You won't have your Facebook followers; nobody will be on that platform, etc., or whatever. Email lists are still valuable in Canada, and for direct marketing. Then things outside your purview. So how are you going to reach broader media? So traditional media and plus blog, internet, and then traditional media and then internet media. How are you going to reach those? Think about that. Often people engage team members for those, which are fee-for-service publicists that you could just pay a small fee to handle the announcement of your record and then handle press engagements. Then keep going down the list. Okay, radio. How am I going to reach radio? I'm going to do this myself. I'm going to service it. I'm going to hand it to college. Maybe you don't understand what radio is. Well, then maybe that's sort of a pause. If you notice you have a blind spot there, and maybe that's a chance to meet with a peer who maybe in the community who knows how to access radio and has done it before, because you can do some of this stuff on your own, and you can also hire people to service to college, or you could service to CBC yourself. But going to commercial radio on your own is very ambitious. It depends on your genre. If you want to know what the strengths are of your genre as well, like you'll know as a fan how people are reaching you, how your favorite artists are reaching you. Kind of look at them and go, okay, they're reaching me like this all the time. Am I doing this because I'm working in that same sphere? So you kind of, there's a model, role models exist all over the place. So you can go through the other categories too. Video production. What am I going to do to support the release of video content? We all need online content these days. And I think that might be and then ads. What are you going to do for promoted posts, ads, actual ads, posters, graphic design? Those are the big pieces that I look for, certainly when I'm going through a grant, and then maybe a release timeline. This is what marketing people do. They simply lay out, in a lot of ways, the schedule of all those things we just went over, and they organize it and make sure it happens in that way after brainstorming with, probably their peers and their whatever colleagues.
I was going to say something that relates to what you're saying and also just to what I initially said about like don't make a fake marketing plan. Like if you have a group of people you do music with or if you do music alone, making time when you're talking about making an album to sit down and say like what are we going to do, where are we going to go? Having that sort of conversation before the grant is due tomorrow, like that is also just going to make your marketing plan way better and your grant up. Like people who just sit down and cram the day before, it's kind of a waste of time. You probably like 99% of the time won't get those grants. You have to kind of be thinking about this stuff all the time and like putting in the effort of having like at least, because everyone has social media for their band, but you need to have like a bit of a strategy, try and do something a little different. All that stuff is going to help make your application stronger, that it's not just like boilerplate, like we have Facebook, like, you know, what are you doing with it, etc.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because there's a lot of people who are like, I'm releasing an album next month, how do I get a grant for it? And I'm like, well, first of all, you've already recorded it, so you can't get reimbursed for the money that you put into it. But also, like, the timeline to properly do it is a long one. It's not an album release isn't like, oh, I made something, you know, this month and I'm going to release it next month, unless you're just releasing it to your friends. But I guess the marketing plan is basically, how are you going to make people care outside of your existing circle? And that's what all of those things are doing: the touring, the advertising, using social media. So always keeping that in mind. And I love the idea of like get together with your band, or like get together and think for yourself ahead of time and write out. I always recommend to people to start with like 5 years, like write a 5-year plan, and then write your 3-year plan. Like, what am I going to do in 3 years to get to 5 years, and like sort of back down. But it gives you a really good idea of when you're going to have to even write the grant, and then when you're going to go into the studio. But then you also already have, like, if you have a strategic plan for yourself, you basically have a marketing plan for anything that you apply for. So it's just a really good activity to do in general, whether or not you're planning on applying for a grant now or later. So does anyone have a question about the actual marketing plan of the project itself right now?
What are the most common revenue streams you see with the marketing plan for return on investment, and are there some that we might miss, like some uncommon ones besides merch or CD sales or Spotify or whatnot?
Well, one of the more common ones is for people not to identify how they're releasing their music, like what service, like, or generally if they're unsigned. So identifying that and identifying the release date, and actually putting it together in a timeline which lines up with the way those services work. So because they take a few weeks to load up your stuff, and so that's one aspect I see. The return on investment aspect just doesn't have to be laid out in the grant. The business plan itself should look like there could be, the outcomes would be, there would be a return on investment, right? Like, this is, you guys are serious. It's gonna be correctly monetized across all platforms, and they understand what their business in their particular niche of music. So I don't really love myself seeing kind of people putting in numbers like, we're going to see our projected sales go to like from 100 streams right now to 1 million as an outcome of this project. It's like, well, everybody wants their business to grow 10 times. Like, tell us a fact about that specific to you and how maybe you're going to do that. That would be more interesting. So if you do come in with numbers, I would say back them up with like initiatives that are really authentic to you, and are not just saying, we're going to grow our social media by going on this tour. We're like, whoa, that's self-evident. Like, why is that unique? Tell us something more interesting that will draw the jury in to believe that you guys deserve the funding, because, you understand your market, you understand yourselves as artists, and you have a good plan.
I would say like any decision making that's data driven is really helpful. In general, in juries for factor and things like that. If you see people making decisions based on their, say, Google Analytics for their website or Spotify Analytics, because those are so readily available, I think that helps the person reading your application understand that you understand where, you know, where your revenue is coming from and where you could, you know, potentially gain more of it from those communities. So definitely look at like where are things being streamed the most, and when, like maybe there are peak times when your music's being listened to. You can literally on Google Analytics. How many of you have Google Analytics for your website? Get it. It's crazy. It will break it down to the most excruciating detail, like what internet service provider do these people have? What device are they looking on? You can get a lot of information about who's listening to you and who's interested in you that way. So definitely, it's free. So get on that because it'll help you create a better view of how you can make more money, you know?
I guess in showing what you're putting on your grant application too, it's good to keep in mind I know particularly with MFM, like it's people are looking at the marketing plan for like 3 minutes, 4 minutes maybe before they make a decision sometimes. So facts, are really good.
10, 15. But it feels like 3 to 4 for the jurors.
They're not reading every word though, but everything in there needs to be good. And so facts are important because you can be like, that they're not just saying things, they're saying stuff that is backed up.
Yeah, being fluffy and artsy is not for for grant applications. Like this is all about business, really. It's not like, oh, like you should fund this because I'm super artsy fartsy and like, you know, people just want to like chill out to my music and I make them feel good. That's not what the jury wants to hear at all. Yeah, approved. Perfect.
2 sentences, we got it all.
Yeah, and in that like
so 10 grand.
Yeah, what Riley was saying, like you have to understand that if there are juries like in Factor or MFM or whatever, like these are busy people who work in music. They're trying to do an effective job of looking through these applications, but they're not going to read like a long paragraph. And so the best way I think is to sort of point form things and to really like you'll see when you go around just to like really put good headers on stuff like tour history and like, you know, track record, because there's different jury members will look for different things because we're all people and we all care about different things. For me, I'm like, if you haven't done, you know, this is just because touring is my thing. I'm like, if you haven't been on the road, like you're not a real artist, like, because I've been touring heavily for like 10 years. So for me, I'm going to be looking at tour dates more than maybe like how many Instagram followers you have. Like that's more important to me as a jury or a juror. And, you know, I obviously will look at all the other things as well, but just keep in mind that people are going to go to certain sections that really speak to them. And so if you make those really clear, then they can kind of flip through and really look at what they are looking for. But let's actually talk about other assets like that, because now the marketing plan is like specific to a project, but there's other assets that can be included, like whether it's a recording application or whether it's one for touring or whether it's one for video. What are some other things that people can include in their application that will help their cause?
I am a huge believer in your network being your net worth, if you know what that means. Like, the more people you know, the better you will do because more people care about you. And generally, when you're trying to market an album, you're trying to get more people to care about you in general without them actually knowing you personally. But you can get a long way with the people who do know you personally. So things like going to holiday parties of, you know, like if there's a Music Manitoba holiday party, or if there's an I'm saying Ontario because I'm from Ontario, but Manitoba Arts Council holiday party, or Creative Manitoba's was last night. We popped into that because we like meeting people. Those people, if they care about you on a personal level, will write you things like letters of recommendation, which is a huge thing and will set you completely apart from the other applications because they probably won't have a letter from the same person with the same, you know, job or whatever they do in the industry. So getting to know the people in your industry is a huge thing, and it'll help you so much. It's crazy because even some people will reach out to you and say, have you heard about this? Like, I've had so many people who just message me and say, oh, there's this new video grant like for women of color, like you should check it out. And I'm like, whoa. And that's just because I met them at some event that I went to. So it's really, really valuable to just meet a lot of people and just or just volunteer at different things so that when you need a letter and you're really serious about writing a grant, that they'll support you. So I think letters are a big one.
Yeah, that kind of goes a little bit with, I mean, it's not like team really unless they've signed you, but just to have that backup support, like if like a radio DJ, local radio DJ who loves your music, to be like, if this comes out, I'm totally gonna play it on like my What's New weekly show. That's a really great point. Is there anything else that would help besides the marketing plan?
Well, you're gonna have to put in a bio. And the bio should be well written. I think. Are you looking at bios? Are you talking about bios, Riley? Yeah, today.
I'm talking about extra stuff.
So yeah, so bios. So bios would be one of the opening documents that the jury reads in ours, anyways. And I think factors too. Elise, is that correct? That they look the. I guess you can't disclose if you're a factor jurist, but she's supposed to disclose this. So do you know if it's bios that they see first? Is that what the first section they read?
It's like, it's different. Like the folder opens and they can click on different things. Right. So it's kind of whether or not they actually want to look at your bio. Mm-hmm. I would generally say having really, really good music is the most important thing, because if your music sucks, they won't even like look at your bio. But yeah, if your music is awesome and you think that they'll be entertained enough to look through all of the different things in that file, having a good bio is important.
Yeah, a bio that's succinct and has highlights and is no more than a page. For anybody who's that's my 2 cents. And it should not have anything negative in it, because that will just jump right out. I remember reading a bio about an artist that has said, and despite being declined by multiple other funders, we still are a band and have persevered or something. And I was just like, why are you saying that?
Another kind of like do and don't aspect, I guess, that we can add in. I was literally just talking to Peter about this outside, because even with our applications, like we try and get through them as fast as possible. We have a lot of them coming through, especially for travel. So you tend to start skipping over things, or you're just looking for key things. And a lot of the grants now are online. So when you're filling them in, it'll say, what are your goals? And then it'll say 500 words under. And then you're typing away and you see the words depleting. And a lot of the people, a big mistake that I see is people just trying to use the 500 words. They're like, how can I best describe what I'm trying to do in 500 words? Trust me when I say, if you can do it in 100, like, that's so awesome. Like, if you could be so clear about what you're doing in 100 words and you don't need to use the other 400, I think that means you know a lot about yourself. That being said, if you need the 500 words, by all means, use it. But I described it as like, it's super cold out right now, and then you walk in and it's hot, and you're like layered in all your sweaters. Like, that's how I feel jury members feel when they see that everybody's used the whole 500 words on every question. They're just like, I'm just so hot, and I just can't do this right now. Like, can I just take off some layers and like get to the point, of what's going on? So I would say just be as clear as possible, as long as you're making your point clear. If you need the space and the time, then fine. But if you don't, then just like know yourself and know what you're doing.
Yeah, being verbose is not an asset, but having clearly presented facts and truths is. And one of the other things I wanted to mention before I move past bio is that don't include bios for each individual member of your band.
He's like looking at me because I totally did that on my first MFM application. It was like we each individually had our own bio. It was like Elise Roller from Calgary.
I'll just say, you know who you are. Elise.
One specific thing I'm thinking of that is a good additional thing to have. I did a grant a couple years ago. The band had gotten into top 10 on Earshot just by themselves without having any radio tracker or publicist, and that's really big. Like that's a big deal. Lots of people listen to college radio. So if you're in top 10 across the country, put that in. If you have some really good. If you were in a big online publication, or even just one that you really care about, like if you're like if I love this blog and they represent something that I care about, put that on, because that.
Yeah, I would say put that in your artist bio, went top 10 with our last release, and then also in the radio section of your application, refer to that again, just so the jury gets it twice. Any good news, it's good to put it in twice. Just little lines like that, just say, hey, we're going back to college radio where we were successful with our last recording. We went to top 10. It's super annoying. right, to think like that. But unfortunately, you're just trying to reinforce all the couple positive things, the couple positive seats. No artist has, dozens and dozens of crazy stats that are all strong, that they're going to set them apart. Most artists will have 5 or 6 big story pieces about their career that makes them unique and also has made them notable in some way. And those are the ones you guys want to focus on. And it goes down to even for bands that haven't done very much, like maybe you played on a couple good festivals or you had a great opening spot. Those could be nice little pieces to put in to let the jury know that other people in the industry are also backing you. And I had one more point about that, which I'm kind of forgetting, which I'll come back to as soon as somebody else starts talking.
As far as like putting down, track record, like maybe we'll talk a little bit about track record and past tour dates. I mean, if a band tours a lot or does a lot of shows, like we don't want all of the shows that you've done, but what's a really clear and concise way that a band that's busy in live performance can, put that out to the jury? And also, what are some, things that they should be talking about as far as track record goes?
You've toured a lot. What are you going to put in your next app?
I usually just put the last year, and then I will bold shows that are important, like where we opened for someone big or something. That's what I would do.
Do you put the whole tour, or do you just say U.S. tour, 17 dates, blah blah blah, or do you list them all?
Well, I like to have a page that's their last touring, because I think it, to me, I'm if I was reading it, I would be oh, they did a lot of touring, and that's good. If it's in the last year, there's 30 shows or something or more, then that can't be bad in my thinking. But I don't know.
And I guess too, if it's if you're a juror and you're oh, they play pianos, I played there, and then you have this little reminder of oh, I don't know. Maybe it would be good.
Yeah,
I guess there's no one
actually,
right
it's
answer.
what it is. That's proof that you have a work ethic and you're invested, and that's great. So anything like that is useful, and those things usually get those are things that juries just glance at, and that's not read. They won't read every line that you put in your tour list. It's so you don't have to worry about that bogging down the jury, and that's okay. People will put I've seen stacks of dates presented by some artists that have a huge touring history. They put in one band that applies to us on the regular, puts in their entire history from the day that they started. Right, Bonnie? Yep. And Bonnie and I are please don't make us kill this many trees for the jury, and photocopy this 25 pages.
Well, Factor for your artist profile, they actually if you start a profile now, they want you to list all the shows that you do in great detail. They have a spreadsheet for it and everything. So if you're staying on top of your Factor artist profile, which isn't totally necessary right away, but if you are staying on top of that, then it's all there anyways. So might as well.
The other piece I thought we should mention is that's important. So we've talked about the marketing plan, the bio, letters of support, including tour history, and also for recording. I think it's good to have a little project overview paragraph right at the top before the marketing plan really starts, where you describe all the marketing initiatives. And I actually recommend this for all of our grants, and I can't remember if there's a place to drop that in Factor. Simply, you'll say I am this artist from Winnipeg, and I am going to be recording at this studio over these dates because I'm going to get ready to release my second record, which will be coming out on this time. And all of a sudden, the jury goes from not knowing at all what they're about to read to having a thesis in a sense, which will brief them quickly and get them right to the point, understand when you're recording, you understand it, they understand that you know what you were talking about, and everything else just is going to support that really simple paragraph.
That really simple paragraph is literally what Factor is looking for on the artist development program. They only give you 300 words. So that is, a great point, because you can use that for your Factor artist development application, and then just tack that on when you apply for an MFM recording grant, that project overview. It's great. Yeah.
Another piece to include is I recommend is if you're using a publicist, a fee-for-service publicist, you list them and they're in your team in a team member section if you can do that. And if you're doing tasks yourself, don't put your name under every role in the music business as doing it. So I've seen apps where it's been the artist is saying they're the producer, the manager, the agent, the publicist, I don't know, the bookkeeper and their web designer. You're like, okay, whoa, we understand you're doing everything. This is not reinforcing the jury to believe that in the professionalism of this application, they understand you're going to take care of these things yourself. Okay, fine, just say that in the application. I'm currently self-managed and self-booked, and I actually have web skills, and I'll be doing this. Okay, but don't make an empty list of this. But do include a team section if you have team members, such as a publicist, radio tracker, agents, managers, and labels. And if you do have such members, such as a publicist, have them include or get them to give you their marketing plan, because they'll have a little proposal for you where they list their services that they're going to undertake for you. And that's a really good supporting item to put in as well.
I actually like when Riley in their breakout groups, Riley's going to have these sort of assets, and I have a proposal that I should print out because I forgot to do that, and then you can kind of look and see, because I think it's good for people to see what they are supposed to get from a publicist for these, because sometimes people say they're a publicist and they don't have one of these things, and that's bad.
Tessa, what kind of assets do you need for the travel grant for artists?
Just a letter of invitation.
Yeah.
So on the SOCAN Foundation side, it's super, super simple. We think you deserve the money if somebody thinks you deserve the gig, basically. So this is the first year, because we changed our guidelines, that we actually ran out of travel money in the last couple, I think it was as of 2 weeks ago. So it is going to reopen again in February of 2019. So just keep that in mind if you're looking to apply for something afterwards. But if you get into an official showcase somewhere, if South by Southwest wants you for something, just show us the letter, and that's all you really need to do. And tell us how it's going to. It takes 15 minutes. How is this going to help you? And what are you going to gain from this? That's about it.
Yeah, for our tour program, we don't require everything that we kind of gone over, but most of those elements are there. We would require a marketing plan that's a little bit shorter, that just really is focused on the marketing of the record, or the marketing of the tour and how it relates to your record. Generally, I find that most people, once they've written a marketing plan, as we've just sort of gone over, you can use it across a lot of applications. You can recycle it for Factor, for our video, for our marketing, as well as our tour program. In the tour one, you'll include an itinerary rather than your tour history. We're not funding things you did in the past. We're funding things in the future. We don't need a tour history. But we will need a marketing plan that kind of is tweaked a little bit towards the tour, and you'll be talking about initiatives specifically that you're going to be doing to fund the tour. And there we don't really require letters of support either, but we do require a bio. And publicist submissions are never harmful at all. So if you are hiring a publicist to work the tour and do promotion for you on the tour, or radio people, you can include their proposals as well, and that will definitely add weight and increase your chances of funding.
I have 2 examples at the back. I have one travel assistance from SOCAN Foundation. I also have one from Canada Council, and then Elise has one of mine from Factor, where the goals are pretty much copy and pasted. It's all the same initiative, and SOCAN Foundation was approved, Factor was approved, and then Canada Council was recommended, as I said. So it's if you have the information and you know what people want, it's okay to, it'll make it a lot easier on yourself if you just, keep folders with this information that you can copy and paste.
Yeah, totally. Actually, when you go to write your first grant or your first marketing plan, it is really daunting, but I'd recommend giving yourselves time. And it's great that you're here now, because any of these deadlines are happening at the end of January. But give yourself lots of time, and then have people, like us, go through it and look over it and edit it and give you some tips. Because once you have that shell, that's the hardest amount of work is right off the bat. But once you have that, then with the next release or the next tour, you can just sort of update it and build off of that. And make any, changes that you need to. But generally, you're going to be doing all of the same things. You're going to be marketing to your target audience in all of these things in the same way until a new thing comes out, and then you can talk about that in the next application.
I forgot to mention that for the recording apps, it's good to include your the resumes of your producer or mixers as well. And I need those actually also for our video program. If you're using a director, I know people often forget, and that then I have to chase them for it, and it drives me crazy.
I did want to ask about when it's like not listing all of your team members, like if you're doing everything yourself, not being like, oh, producer, Elise Roller, songwriter, Elise Roller, whatever. But say you have somebody in your band who like is a publicist, or who does like book for, like, let's use for example Living Hour. We actually have an example of one of their applications. Thank you. But you know, there's Gil runs First Date Touring. So is that like a good thing for a band like that to put in as like booking agent Gil Carroll, but he's also in that band?
Yeah, because he's good at it and he has a track record and he's working in a professional capacity. So therefore, including it makes sense. And as I say that if the artist is missing any of those team members in the application, they just should demonstrate the capacity to execute the task themselves, and they have an understanding of that task. So you just, the juries are used to seeing some tasks handled by artists, and some are very good at it. When there's another artist who's not a professional booking agent, but has been booking themselves across the States for years, and has a track record of doing that. And she pitches that case in the app, and it's just a sentence or two.
Okay, cool. Does anyone have any more questions right now? Yeah.
You guys say that when we apply, not to get discouraged, because most likely we won't get it on the first try. So, when was your first grant approved after getting denied so many times?
Well, for me, I think I applied. I'm trying to think back. I started a bunch of times. Like I would be like, I should look into learning about grants, and I went and talked to, I can't even remember who it was. It was a really long time ago, who was working in the job that Elise does now here. Can't remember, before Roland even. So I talked to someone here, and I was like, I don't think I can do this. And then I came back a couple years later and tried again. I can't remember how many times that happened, but I applied for 2 grants. I applied for an MFM and a factor, and I actually did get the factor, which was just luck, kind of, because there is a bit of luck sometimes with these juries. It's good to remember that. I mean, like, you never know, really. They also have to connect with what you're saying. So I did say before, like, it's a waste of time to apply the day before, but I mean, you should just try. Have you applied for grants before? Oh, I would say just try. If you haven't done it before, definitely try and see what happens. Send if you're working with MFM, like, you can send Stephen your grant and be like, what do you think? Right?
Yeah, we'll look at it in draft form before it's officially submitted.
So you can talk to people for advice. You can talk to Elise for advice. So just try. And
How many people here have not applied for a grant yet? So, like, the chances of you getting your first grant just went up a little bit because you're actually looking into the information that you need. Whereas the first time I wrote a grant, I didn't have, not that I didn't have access to this, but I didn't take the initiative to go and learn something first. So the fact that I was denied the first factor grant is not that strange to me. Whereas, you know, a lot of you are taking initiative to learn about this beforehand, so you're already going in with better tools. It's not impossible to get a grant on your first try. It's just unlikely if you're not doing the right things and getting the right things in order, right? So.
Yeah, that being said, too, it's really important when you're not approved to get the juror comments. Some of them will not be helpful. Like, we once got a comment that was like, a better photo would be good. And I'm like, that's okay, thanks. And it was a great photo. It was like, we had a whole spread in the Winnipeg Free Press with that photo. And I was like, really? Anyways, but that was not helpful at all. Cause I was like, well, I get, like, that's very artistic. And some people loved that and some people hated it. But then there's other comments where, they'll say, this sounds, maybe a little bit too ambitious for this artist's stage right now in the game or whatever. And then you think, okay, maybe I shouldn't have talked so much game. Like, even though I think I personally have it, but like sometimes it's better to talk a little bit less game and just be, like for me, I am all like, I'm boisterous. And like, that was one of the comments is like maybe a little too ambitious. And I'm like, damn, okay. So turn it down a notch on the next one, right? So getting the jury feedback is really good because that's the only way that you're going to know how. And I've sat down with Steven when, we had a phone conversation after one of my applications didn't get approved, and you know, he just said these are some of the things that you could have done differently. Like, it was still a strong application, just like not strong enough to stand out against the other ones. And that's the other thing you also have to remember is it is kind of luck because it depends on who else is applying at the same time and how much money is available. Because, like, you know, I might be applying at the same time as Royal Canoe, and there's only like so many applications that they can be like, yeah, thumbs up, and they're not going to give me the money over a band that's already established and has a huge fan base, right? So you just have to think about, like, it just it just kind of depends on, you know, the jury, like who's there, how they're connecting with your application, who else is applying at the time, how much money there is.
For the money question, that's mostly true of the tour video marketing, where we get drained. You're not competing against the other applications financially in our juries. Anyways, I don't know, but Factors, you are competing against the national pool. So that's very true of Factor, what you just described. But their money pool, they do have a certain amount, which they allot per round, and they give you you have to hit a certain, they break out in some crazy formula, an algorithm actually that shoots out some percentages, who gets funded and who gets declined, and it's done nationally. So you're competing in a pool. Ours, each juror is charged to adjudicate each application on its own merits, and they have to approve each application right there. So there's no points system, and the jury are not privy to your budget or our budget. That's just on us to make do. And we generally have no problem getting funding to all the funded applicants, unless there's a crazy rush. But it's not where we canceled one deadline, which is maybe what you're referring to. But that didn't affect the jury pool. That just said we just didn't have money for the next round because we had so many level 3 applications wipe out our budget. But that probably won't happen again. It was a bit of an anomaly. But whereas Factors, she's right. You're competing nationally.
Yeah, like Factor, my band was denied once, and we were, like, got the jury comments, and then, of course, like, I'm the kind of person who calls in and is like, what's going on? Like, I want to know everything. I want to know every reason why I didn't get this. And then I also wanted to know how far below we were, because they basically take all the scores and, like, the top, like, say 25 get funded. It's more than that, but say the top 25 get funded, then it's all those top 25 were over 87.9% on their score. But anyway, my band came in like 0.2% under the actual funded. So, like, getting offended about it and getting really discouraged is just like, you know, you're shooting yourself in the foot because you could be, like, literally for Factor, like 0.2% under what was funded, and your application was super strong. But there were, you know, other people whose applications were just as strong, and the people who were on their juries were maybe a little bit more generous with their scores. So yeah, just don't let it get you down. Like, eventually it'll work out.
I think another thing to mention as a first time applicant, a lot of mistakes or a don't that we see is the hope to and the aspire to, which is, like, literally means nothing. Like, a dream is cool, but I'm going to do this. So you have to talk to a juror as if you already have the money. Really, it's like, this is what I'm going to do. This is what I'm setting out to do, and there's no hope to do this, and I aspire, and if I get the money, this is what's going to happen. You have to make it appear like this is going to happen no matter what, because that confidence will show through the application. And very easily they're going to dismiss the, well, I hope to. It's like, well, this is not a, like, be all end all situation. Like,
yeah, like, I hope to win the lottery.
Exactly, right? So.
Yeah, Ty from Factor was here last week, and we did a panel, and he said that exact same thing in a really succinct terms. It's like, you write the grant like you don't need the money. You write it. It's just like, you're going to go and do this. And hey, grant person, if you want to come in, I got this good thing going. You want to get in on it? He had much more swagger.
Oh yeah,
He's watching.
I was
He
on a
very-
panel with Ty for Indie
Yeah.
Week a couple weeks ago, and actually I was trying to get a hold of him last week, and he's like, "I'm out of the office," and I was like, "Where is he?" And now I know.
Yeah, he was here. Yeah, so that was a really good lesson, and I think that's something to keep in mind. Is just prefacing all of these conversations about funding is that I led my career like this, which was to go forward with my career regardless of what funding was going to do, and funding was just completely ancillary to my goals as an artist. And I focused on my career, and the funding was just something used when it was as an essential service or like backup periodically, but it wasn't essential for my career.
Yeah, I've seen things go really bad when people are like gambling with like it promising money to people. I don't know. There's just horror stories that I could talk about, but I probably shouldn't go to. But people who promise money to people and things and that they don't actually have, and they're like, well, I have to get the grant. That don't do that. Make sure you can realistically pay for things, whether or not you get the grant or not. But that kind of confidence is important.
Yeah, I think a common mistake that we have, by the way, grants like this aren't available in most countries all over the world. It's not there for American musicians. It isn't there for musicians in the UK. So, like, this is not something you're entitled to. Grants are not, you're not entitled to get them. They are a supplement, and they're there to support. They aren't there to make your project go round. And you just think about all of the successful artists from other countries that have never had this opportunity. They're selling things. They're selling their favorite guitar to play for a record and have to borrow a crappier one from a friend to actually make that record. So, you know, I think at the end of the day, it's important to look at your project and be like, I'm going to do this with or without the funding. And sometimes it's good to be realistic. Like, if you can't afford to record a 10-song album, then do a 6-song EP or release some singles for a little bit first and get your fan base up and sell some merch and make some money that way. But it is really important to not say, I'm going to record this album if I get the money. No, you're going to record the album, or you're going to record the singles, or you're going to record the EP. And if the funding comes in, that is freaking awesome. Now you have more money to put into marketing and advertising and better merchandise and, you know, like maybe things that you would have had to chintz out on before. So just remember, you know, even with touring, it's not like I'm going to go on tour because I can get a grant. It's like, no, I'm going to go on tour and make sure I can get from point A to B to C to D and back home and actually be able to survive on my own. And when that grant money comes in, that's awesome. It's just like happy moment. Yeah.
Do you have any questions? Oh, there's one.
So I'm wondering how many people are in like a jury and who's selected to be a jury member. And another question is, in a jury, is it specifically like they have a genre of juries that play that style of music, or is it an eclectic mix of just people? So what's that like for jurors?
It's a great question.
I think they, with Factor, I don't know if you can touch on this a little bit more, but anybody can apply to be a juror as long as you are in the creative, in the music industry and the creative industry. So, so really any of you could apply to be a juror.
Which I would recommend.
Yeah, because then you get to see, you'll see the difference between, and you'll be able to identify the ones that you enjoy reading and the ones that you don't. And then you'll be like, oh, that's what I was doing wrong. Because mine is being reflected more in the side of like, oh God, I want to skip over all of this, right? So it's a good way to see the difference between who's getting funded and who's not, and have a more in-depth knowledge of that type of thing. I think they try and find diversity as far as genres. I think specific applications are sent to specific people.
Yes.
Yeah.
So this is really important, actually. I'm glad you asked this question, because on Factor, it asks you your genre of music. It's really important to, like, the fewer genres you select, really the better. Because if you say like country, rock, pop, bluegrass, Americana, or whatever, and you sound like Bryan Adams, and then they send your thing to a rock guy, like a heavy rock guy, then that guy's probably not going to like your music. Do you know what I mean? Like, if it's, so the best thing to do, like, if you're in a hard rock band, just put hard rock. Don't put hard rock, alternative, psychedelic. Like, don't do that. If you think that somebody who likes country music is going to like your music the best, select country. If you think folk is your primary genre, like, just focus on the primary, and you can have a secondary, but they're going to base your the juror on what genre you selected. So just think about that.
And they do like 6 to 7 jurors per, like, is that what their pool? They create little.
I don't
pools.
actually know like how many, but yeah, it's like a handful-ish around. Yeah.
And we do 2 juries of 3 to get approved. So we have 3 jurors per panel, and you have to be approved by 2 separate panels unanimously for you to be approved. And those jurors are selected from the music industry here, based on diversity and genres and expertise.
Can you talk about the unanimous thing, just so they understand exactly how that works and what happens if there's a disagreement?
Yeah, unfortunately, to get through our jurors, you have to get 6 people to agree that they like your music. That's essentially it. You need 2 groups of 3 essentially to agree that. So they, the jurors have this chance to review your files, and they do it. We do it live in a room, kind of old school, which I kind of like because it's a chance for back and forth and shared perspectives on your material. Factor, they have more time with your material, but there's no chance for back and forth deliberation, which I think kind of weakens it, so they can't be kind of swayed. And people, if they have an understanding about the applicant in the room, like a juror understands maybe some background on you, maybe they have genre expertise in your genre, they can backfill some information for maybe another juror who's not as informed about your career as maybe they are. So there's some kind of benefits to that, and they have a short deliberation. But at the end of that, we have to draw them to a vote, which is usually can be very painful if they're divided, and they all have to vote unanimously in favor of the application on that 3-person panel. And if one is dissenting or 2, it's incumbent upon the person who's in favor to try and convince the other 2 that they should change their vote. And so then it gets interesting, and then you see the arguments for and against, and how somebody's going to dig their heels in. Then if it's not unanimously approved by that panel, it's declined.
Does that answer everything? Yep. Okay.
So if factor is genre based, so genre specific, is it also region specific? So jurors of the region, or more heavily jurors of the region?
Yeah, they do try as much as possible to have the jurors in the region that you're from, just because so there is familiarity. So they definitely try to hit those marks, because somebody out in the Maritimes may have no idea who you are, and they're not going to give you as high a score if they don't have that familiarity. So they as much as possible they try to do that.
Elise,
yep.
time.
Yeah, we're going to break in a couple minutes and go into those groups.
Okay, so I was wondering, for the jury panel, I was wondering how long are they going to deliberate on discussing your album and
Do you guys have juries?
going back?
We have juries. So it's a little bit complicated just because we're private. So everything is pretty internal. We have our own committees, and usually those are made up of board members who make these decisions. Because our grants are a little bit different than Factor, for travel specifically, there's the travel committee made from the board, and we go through those in a first come, first served basis. And we, as I said, more of them will be approved than not. Just as long as we have everything we need, then it's all good. We also have awards, so that's another thing. And right now they're tailored more towards young songwriters and composers. Those are much like what Stephen was describing, are live kind of discussions where there is a little bit of, it gets a little heated sometimes because people are trying to stick up for certain pieces that they like and whatnot. So it can go back and forth despite the rating. And obviously for Factor, it's all numbers based. So yeah. And
as far as the time that a juror puts on Factor, like into reading your thing, it depends on how much time that person has, because they're given a deadline. You send the thing and they're like, we need this back in 2 weeks. So if they're like super busy in those 2 weeks, like they might just be doing it really quickly. If it's somebody like who, you know, is really passionate and really wants to read thoroughly and stuff, they might read through your entire thing and listen to your, you know, assessment track several times. There isn't like a specific amount of time because each juror does it on their own time. And
ours is about 15 minutes average. It can go longer if they're not unanimous. If they really like the stuff and the app is well written, it should take no more than 15 minutes to go through it. You're not submitting a novel.
Also, like, I just wanted to restate for anyone who's not familiar with the MFM, like, it's just the recording that has the open juries.
Yeah, that's right.
I think we've said that already, but like the touring and stuff, they decide internally about that. So it's just a different process that I don't know anything about.
We just do it on if it's adjudicated by staff based on merit, eligibility, and funds available.
Okay, so we're gonna say goodbye to our online crowd. Thank you for tuning in. Should have been here to see the examples.
And the lunch.
So we are gonna do some breakout sessions, and I've got it divided up a little bit. So Stephen is gonna talk to everybody about the budgeting side.